yes, as Mike said, prepare to be blown away. First of all, I want to put Meyer in a kind of context. He seems to just jump out of nowhere as the Liechtenauer tradition's only didactic treatise. He's the only person who instructs us. We've got lots of manuscripts, we've got lots of manuals. Mike does an excellent job giving an overview of the Liechtenauer tradition. It's really good. And yet, all of that, we only have Joachim Meyer telling us, instructing us exactly how to do things. Love him or hate him. You can be one of those Ernst, okay? That's fine. He's the only guy who does it, right? Where does this come from? Why is Meyer so hell-bent on being the first guy? Well, have a little context. First of all, I'm going to just say what Mike said earlier. I'm telling you stuff you already know. So basically, you've got the printing press in the 15th century, the incunabula, the books that were printed from mid-15th century up to 1500, and then kapow. John can tell you all about paper mills and explosion of books and whatnot. But all of a sudden, I don't pretend to know exactly why. People have lots of theories. Books about how to do things just start exploding. This is Andreas Vesalius's 1543 De Humani Corporis Fabrica Libri Septa, on the fabric of the human body in 7 books. And this guy just goes to town. All right? He just starts with, all right, here are all the ligaments. This is how they attach to the bones. He breaks it down to fundamentals. Okay? Then he traces out the nervous system, the veins. It's absolutely mind-blowing. And we've never had anything like this before.
It's pretty accurate.
That's pretty accurate. Yeah. Okay.
Right, cut up a lot of bugs.
Yeah, he spent a lot of time doing things that you and I probably don't think about. Okay. And this is out there. This is 1543. This is a thing. A lot of you can in the culture all of a sudden it became very, very much a trend to sort of validate whatever discipline that you did by having a book, because books are things, and things are important, right? So, next slide, please. Here we go. We've got Adam Lonaker, 1564, a Kreuter book. Okay, that's the herb book, and it sounds like some sort of stoner version of mid-16th century. It was published 4 times between 1557 and 1577. I mean, people loved this thing. Okay, they ate it up. Again, he's just breaking down the herbs. He's just breaking everything up. He's telling you how you find them. He's too much time on his hands. He went from herbs to minerals to gems, and then he started talking about distillation. Okay, so he was just flying. Next slide, please. You've all heard of Nicholas Copernicus, again, 1543. De Revolutionibus Orbium Modestium, on the revolutions of the celestial spheres. Okay? And this guy, he just went, book 1, overview. Now I will teach you trigonometry, because you'll need that to understand what I'm about to say. Now I will give you the principles of my theory, heliocentrism, which we'll get to later. Okay? Now we'll talk about the movement of the sun. Okay, book 4, movement of the moon. And then books 5 and 6 were all just concrete examples of how this all flowed together. So he went from basic ground to simple to complex in terms of explicating things. Next slide, please. Okay. Now, Mike has already, first of all, I want to apologize for what Michael has referred to as my Ghetto Slides. Okay? Michael has access to all sorts of sources, and so, of course, he gets the most recent, up-to-date, look at the crinkles of the parchments. It's very important. These are all from the online collection I have, which were photocopies from Patrick Pugliesi's collection. And so they may not be as nice as Mike's stuff, but they're near and dear to my heart. Mike did a great job already talking about Marazzo, so I will just leave it there. Mike's already made that connection.
So, again. Drive it home.
I drive it home. Marazzo, dagger plays. Joachim Meyer, dagger plays. Okay? Did I get the visual? You're all set? Okay, good. Got it. Okay. So here we go. So, Joachim Meyer, some believe, is writing his book. Okay, now see, this is a good slide. Okay, no more Ghetto Slides for a while. Okay, as in two more slides than this. All right. So you've got this beautiful plate. I mean, you all were just downstairs. You saw the thing. It's gorgeous, right? But why did he write it? I mean, we've got Chronicle. We've got all these manuscripts. What would possess a man to do this? Well, one theory is, Joachim Meyer tells us, okay, he is he is lamenting the fact that there are all these other books, you know, he's from astronomy, herbs, some anatomy, right? All these other books. He says, you know, they bring it almost to the apex of their art, he says, okay? And yet we have nothing for fencing. So he's almost apologetic. He's like, all right, if I gotta be the guy, I'm gonna be the guy. He's not like, I know everything. He's like, no, you know, fencing, represent, okay? So, he writes this wonderful book, and there you go. He begins, how is he different from other masters, pardon me? Again, my audience will probably know more about this than I do, but in most of the early Liechtenauer tradition, you've got some general theory, tell me if this sounds right, okay? Then you got a whole bunch of devices, then you get a conclusion wrapping up the theory with some vague principles, et cetera, et cetera. Now, depending on where in the tradition you're talking about, you'll get, you know, secret verses, you'll get glossators, et cetera, et cetera. Meyer, in his first book, and this goes with all 5 weapons that Michael described, starting with the longsword, begins with an introduction, breaking things down to their fundamental components as a way of, I'm not going to say he's copying these other people, but as I said, he wants to raise the art to an equal level of all these other arts. Okay?
Pedagogy structure.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to get at. See, it says pedagogy. Thank you. All right. So, what he's talking about is fundamentals. So, the pattern seems to be, and you can break it down in all 5 books, you know, don't take my word for it. First, he starts with, you know, the intro, but then he starts with, excuse me. Yes, divisions. Okay? Have you ever noticed, next slide please. There you go, the cursor's on the correct spot. The 4 divisions, okay? And he subdivides the 4 divisions to the body and the head, okay? He talks about, how many of you, you've all read Meyer, right? I'm talking to the right crowd, you've all been there? Okay. So what he's talking about is, I was blown away the first time I read it because he's talking about, and so a man shall have an ear on the right side of his head, thus he shall also have an ear on the left side of his head. And I'm like, okay, this guy is taking this whole pedagogical thing to heart. Okay, he's running with this. He's talking about left ear, right ear. He's going to give you the divisions. Boom, boom. Okay? In all the books, he moves from divisions, he then moves to wards, then cuts, then counters, then devices. You'll see the pattern. He makes one exception. In Dusak, he kind of, he puts the divisions later on in the chapter, but it's still there. Okay, it's still really solid. Stepping and deceiving get mixed in to the whole discussion. But as you all know, Meyer is one of the only masters that actually talks about stepping at all. Next slide, please. Yeah. More divisions. He gives us clear examples of how he wants his cuts to be executed. You know, there you see the top, Scheidel, you see Zorn, you see Zwerg, and the one at the bottom, the Hunter. Or there's some controversy right now on the interwebs. Yes, something about the Uberswerk. Anybody heard that?
I've heard about that.
You've heard about it?
I don't understand.
I don't understand it either. I read a whole paper on it, and I didn't understand it. The gentleman was very passionate. I didn't quite get what he was trying to say. I will revisit that and defer to greater Uberswerk minds than mine. Okay. Stepping is really cool. At this juncture, I'd like to also put forth the theory that he's, not a theory, you already know this, his system is organic and it sweeps across the weapons, okay? I don't know if you did this, but I definitely did. A long time ago, I got my copy of Meyer, like y'all probably did, and I said, I like Meyer's longsword, so I'll just read the longsword. Okay, that was really not smart of me, because, you know, I should have really taken the hint too. And you should execute this from the middle guard, of which I will speak more of later. Okay, and I was just like, no, it must mean the longsword, right? No, he was talking about the Dusak. Okay? So you have to read, I believe, all 3 of his sword arts, okay, to understand his sword system, so to speak, as a holistic thing. Next slide, please. Yep. More charts. You've got the thing Dusak chart. Next slide. And you go to rate theory. Okay, same thing, except does anyone know? I don't, but I always found it cryptic that the Dussac chart was square, but the rate theory chart is circular. Some hidden meaning, perhaps.
The Dussac has a square point and the repair is a circular point.
Best theory I've heard so far, so we'll go. Again, he is being very clear about what he wants, and since we're talking about stepping data here, you can see the diagrams on the floor. Notice the gentleman, what does the gentleman in the foreground appear to be doing?
A lunge.
A lunge. Meyer never calls it a lunge. Doesn't say it's a lunge. but-
Italians made a lunge, man.
Yeah. That's pretty much a lunge. It's not. It's by modern sport standards, it's not a very good lunge, and you blow your knee out. But you know, it's a lunge. You can see the footwork up in the top left. What does that look like? Stepping offline to avoid a thrust. Yeah. Okay. So he's using things that previous pardon me, it's part of this pedagogy, the diagrams, the cutting. He's doing things that previous masters just haven't done. Okay. Probably because they just weren't trying to have a pedagogical bent. They weren't trying to be didactic. That was not their intent. And to be very clear in terms of didactic approach, Meyer doesn't think for an instant that this book will just do it for you. Grab a book, grab a sword. Natasha, you were saying that before, practitioners. Grab Meyer, grab a sword, you're good to go. No, he clearly states you need a master to help you out. Especially in rate theory. What's that? Mike, why you gotta go? Okay, this is on film. This is not good. Don't be sorry. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay, in addition to clear diagrams trying to talk about it once, I'm sure you're all familiar with this. It gives you very clear-cut drills. All right. This is the famous cutting to the floor openings drill. Okay. He's very explicit. He wants you to cut 3 times through, and then when you're in long point, let the sword go off to your left, and then follow the numbers. This is excellent. It's like fencing by numbers. You know, 1, 2, 3, 4, yay! Okay, and then thwart away. Always thwart away. Okay, cover yourself. Next slide, please. Okay, this is he doesn't have this in his manual, but a buddy of mine was really pleased because he mocked up a Dussac version of Meyer's 6 cuts. He's very explicit. All right. So if you have your Dussac, you see the 1, you cut through the 1 line, then you go across from the 2, then you go down, you go up 3, then up 4, 5, and 6. You see the cutting diagram? Okay. And he talks about, again, let's fold in the stepping. Okay. Everything pardon me, let me backtrack. Meyer stepping. He has a note on stepping. Dustin, I like your quote. Remember for your class? Okay. You will think me a fool for talking about stepping, blah, 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 right? And he says, well, stepping. You go forward, you go backwards, you go left, you go right, and you use another thing called triangle. And again, when I was in my, not so smart phase, I was like, well, I wonder if he has a gather. If I only read the Dussac. Okay, gather step, and you do this. Gather step, and you do this. Okay? And he's giving you a cutting diagram. If you'll permit me to now do what John was calling sidebar. Okay, next slide.
Then the next slide.
Target after Bosworth. Next slide. Okay, go back. Basically, what you just saw was a cutting diagram, all right, 6, and then this is from the early 20th century, and the slide before was from the 19th century. And by the way, the cuts are almost identical. All right, so this is, I'm not saying that Meyer invented saber play, but it is.
I'm going to say that later.
Okay, Meyer invented saber play. Ha! Stole your thunder. Basically, and there's a great, and I'm very excited about this, the Mikima Polish saber. We're all excited about that, right? Okay. We don't have any books about it until the 19th century, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence. And to sidebar, I think it's interesting rule sets that don't allow attacks in the hands, because a really interesting thing I read in saber play when it got real. Okay. And by the way, historical combat, there seems to be a general trend. You drink and then you fight. You drink, you call somebody a bad name, and then you fight. And Polish saber basically ended up with you drink, you call somebody a bad name, you fight, and either somebody dies or there are, and I quote, loose fingers. Okay, so there you go. All right, so these cutting diagrams, I just want to show that the cutting principles I do that go up to the century. Okay, my bad. Now, I want to talk a little bit about context. Meyer's definitely different from the early Liechtenauer masters. In some of his goals, okay? I know some people in this room don't really like 16th century masters, so I won't single them out, but... Shh! John! Don't single anyone out. All right. But, you know, I think it's pretty much common sense that when you have changes to a living tradition, and those changes aren't well documented as to the reasons why, you really need to explore the social context, okay? Yeah, I'm not telling you anything you don't already, okay? Furthermore, I'm going to go out on a limb and say, human beings are perhaps the best creature that I know of, and my wife studies animal behavior, and she gives me good examples, but I still say they're accurate. Of coming up with really abstruse, complicated rules for going about the serious business of taking each other's lives. Okay? There's lots of social contract going on, lots of, you know, I'm going to kill you, and that's a bad thing, but I'm going to do it in the right way. Okay? And so, yes, sir.
I think you actually can find corollaries with a lot of other animals that have, they have sort of, you know, deadly,
Sure.
right?
I'll go with that.
Rams, bouncing heads.
It drives me insane when people say, man is the only creature that kills its own kind. My wife showed me a video of chimpanzees, and I had like nightmares for 2 months and stuff, because I mean, you just do not want to see a chimp going after a chimp that they don't like. And I mean, they gang tackle them, they rip them to shreds, and I was like, why did you do that? I thought we were married. I thought there's, you know, okay, what's going on? All right. So, yes, all right. Jean quoted an article by, let me try to get this right, Pier Marco Terminiello.
Yeah.
Okay, 16th and 17th century dueling. And he also used a lot of stuff from Celestine. And so to try to lump everything together, I'll say that both sources really try to make the point that swords do not equal death. You have swords that don't equal death, okay? I really like Pier Marco's article quoted in Dictionary, 16th century going to Japan, and he noted, he was like, the Japanese wear a long sword and a dagger. And it seems to be most ceremonial, most of their dress. But when they draw those things, somebody dies. And he seemed shocked. He was like, these guys, when they take their swords out, it's real. it's going down. So I found that very telling. I thought that was very interesting. And he also goes on to talk about, you know, where are you in the time period? I think it's very important. You always have to ask yourself, when are you and where are you? Okay? Because he compares and contrasts Italy and France. And he's like, 16th century Italy, you think, you know, that's the birthplace of dueling, so to speak, according to most scholars. However, by the middle of the 15th century, dueling seems to have fallen off. No one's dueling anymore, okay? You're leaving your house with armed entourages, okay? And you're knifing people, you're poisoning them, okay? The Italians quickly learned that they didn't like dueling, okay? On the other hand, the French, they became dueling mad, okay? They got really into dueling. They got complex structures for dueling. They were doing things like, all right, seconds, you know, seconds mean different things in terms of the formal dueling culture, depending on where and when you are in society. Seconds in the French system in the 16th century meant you got a couple extra of your buddies, and there's you, and you line up against him and 2 of his buddies, and you charge. Okay? And you just go. And you go, and you know, every account always ends with something like this. 2 were killed, 1 died later, and 3 were gravely injured. And I mean, it's not like, you know, and the Italian system's like, nobody's dying. But the French were like, yes, the Italians had a great idea. And the Italians were like, no, it's not what we think. That's really not what we're getting at. Yeah, we weren't talking about that, so that's not good.
We had a similar problem in New Orleans when the Americans showed up. They wanted to switch from sword play to shotguns.
Okay.
Mortality rate that's what I understand doing.
All right. I'm having too much fun. Oh yes, French and Italian dueling. Okay. So it begs the question, after Pierre Marco's wonderful article, just recently published,
On Farrar.
yes, you got to ask yourself, well, what about Germany? What was their content? And Jean just basically gave it to you. Okay, so he did a wonderful job. So I'm only going to touch on a couple of things he's already said. I want to dwell on the concepts of fair play and escalation. Okay. Fair play, yes, that seems to be across the board. Italy, well, maybe not so much. I take that back. Okay, if you can knife somebody in Italy, you're good. Okay? But France, it's like, no, you gotta have 3 of your guys and all 3 of my guys. Okay, so that was fair play. Germany, as Jean said, definitely you have to have fair play. It extended to any number of things. It actually got kooky. Fair play extended to, you would have seconds in a duel to make sure, for example, no one was using magical charms. Okay? Seriously, they were like,
Italy too.
are you using balms and ointments on your blades? Because that's not cool. Do you have some special magical unguent that will reward injury from you? You know, and they took this very seriously. They were just like,
They actually had talismans that they thought would make bullets go away, just like Native Americans did.
yeah.
Equally effective.
So, very effective, yes. So, the Germans, they really harp on fair play. And there was one duel, you'll recall Jean brought it up. The fair play goes beyond the agreed upon legal constraints of society. Meaning what we think of as being, that's okay or not okay, that actually trumps law.
Yep.
I'll give you an example. Jean brought up the case of the 2 nobles, okay? One guy gets stroppy, throws some wine in the other guy's face, ringing a bell. He gets upset, knocks him over a table, draws his sword, begins stabbing him, okay? Well, the legal implications there were, okay, let's break this down because we've got to bring the guy in, we've got to check him out. Number one, can we give him corporal punishment? And the people, you know, they checked it out and said, okay, ask our magistrate. No, legally, it wasn't a military affair, so we can't give him corporal punishment. All right, so that's off the books. Hey, we could get him on breaking the peace, okay? And they polled the witnesses, and they were like, okay, breaking the peace. What's going on? Did you hear the guy on the ground call for peace? Call for peace? No, we didn't hear that. Oh shoot, we can't get him. But then they put their heads together, and they're like, all right, put the law to the side for a second. Was this cool? Was this ritterlich behavior? Was this knightly and manly? No, that was not cool. And Jean already told you what the end was, and this would be death for me. You can't drink or carry a sword. Moral of the story, do not stab a guy on the ground. The consequences are not worth it. Okay? Just not worth it. All right. Now, we talked about Meyer's pedagogy, and we talked about social context. Any questions so far? All right, John did a great job of talking about this 4th role, the spontaneous duel. Okay? He talked about how it escalates. Usually somebody will, you'll be just like in normal society. Hey, blah, 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 shut up. And then somebody says something somebody doesn't like, and then you have choices. You have break points. You can always get out of it. And then there were many things John wasn't prepared to say in a polite society or on camera, which I agree, and I will follow that trend. But they're pretty bad, and you are actually obligated to defend your honor. Okay? So everything Jean was indicating in terms of defense, unless someone said something like, hey now, whoa, now your honor's on the line. Did you bring up the husband and wife? Okay, at one point, this guy was just giving it to this other guy, like, you're a so-and-so, you're a rogue, you're a liar, you're a scoundrel, you're a rascal, and the wife just goes, if you do not do something about this, okay, that's it, you're out of his house. So they dueled, they fought, and he got off because my wife was going to kick me out. That's pretty harsh, man, that's pretty okay, that's good, you're right, absolutely right.
Yeah, to add something to that, it's like there's essentially levels of insult that are optional to respond to, and then there's levels of insult that if you don't respond to it, the reason the wife is upset is because you are going to be degraded in society. It's going to affect bargaining for buying and selling things. It's going to affect your hierarchy and the pecking order of every walk of life. You will go down notches if you let that stand. She wasn't willing to hear about it from all the other wives, basically.
And that's very valid. Once again, how we fight, why we fight, what weapons we use, and to what degree of violence we use them, it's all social. I'm not making fun of our brethren here who love to think that German longsword was just, it's about killing, man. You gotta kill him. That's sure. I'm sure that was a context. It was certainly not the only context, and it certainly wasn't probably the majority of the contexts. Okay. So along that theme, you have escalation, you have rising senses. John clearly covered how you had to defend your honor, you had to defend your life, and if you're going to resort to killing someone, you had to show, hopefully with witnesses around, that you were justified. Now, how does that fit into Meyer's pedagogy? Okay. Well, where does Meyer receive the most flack?
No thrusting.
No thrusting
Flats instead of...
No thrusting and flats. You got it. Where do we find that?
Longsword.
Longsword. Thank you. All right. So he starts with longsword. And everybody here knows longsword is the basis for all other weapons, right? Okay. So he starts with longsword, and it is my thesis that what he's doing is training you to be a responsible fencer first. Okay? He teaches you the smacky smack. Okay? He teaches you, the false edge. He teaches you things like that in place of the thrust. He says, we Germans do not thrust, except for the 3 clear examples in longsword where he does. Okay, but I put that to the side. He was getting excited when he's writing. Okay? We do not thrust. Here in Germany, we do not thrust. And there are many reasons for that. And, in addition to not wanting to have that in the festool environment, I don't want my buddy thrusting me, breaking my sternum or something. Jean clearly laid out why we don't want to see that in society. I don't want to go fight the Turk for the rest of my life. That is just not acceptable, all right? So he teaches you first, your first line of defense, it should be your first instinct, to fight as manfully and artfully, but defensively, with low lethality, correct?
Yeah, I'd like to interject one other thing too.
Please.
This is a bit of a theory, but from what I've read from all over the place, everybody from Cortez all the way over to the Polish sources, they seem to be fairly good at healing cuts. They used to put fat and salt.
Oh, okay,
on
sure,
the line.
great.
And you'll see in Flossie, there's a pretty good survival rate from a lot of the cuts, but the thrust, not so much.
Thrust not so much, so we don't want that.
Even a bad cut, even if you lost a limb, like Gus von Berle came in, he survived that because they could deal, they had enough medical skill to where that seemed to be more survivable, whereas the thrust was more likely to eventually
Cauterize it, how it works.
To jump on that, I'll skip ahead to what I was going to talk about. Meyer's rapier, he leads off with like, okay, this is a weapon that was brought to us from a different land, but why would you ever want to fight with this? This is not cool. But if you get some filthy foreigner and he corners you, and you've got a rapier too, and you have to defend yourself, well, here we go.
Just having to have one.
Just having to have one, so right. Okay. So there you go. So basically, you start with a longsword, and you're doing things. Let me ask you, who here, having read Meyer, because I know there are different definitions different times, who here is familiar with the plunge cut from Meyer's longsword? Jeff, Dustin, awesome. This is what I like about this audience. Somebody want to get up and tell us about it? Thank you, Jeff. Okay, demonstrate a long sword.
There's a sword in the corner.
Oh, nice.
Convenient.
So, this is the way I do it.
Sure.
So typically I'll do
Your
this.
interpretation is copyrighted. Well, okay, that wasn't the one I was thinking. My bad.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
How about you
So
demonstrate?
when you say Sturtzhauer, yes, is that what you're talking about?
Don't put me on the spot, Jeff. I'm not sure it's a journalist. Jeff, why are you trying to make me look bad up here? I'm just going to go into the lecture, and I don't feel good about it. The plunge cut, as I understand it, okay? This is my interpretation. Okay? It is a cut, boom, which is quickly followed up with a false edge blow. Okay? We see that in longsword. He's very clear. You've got to use the false edge. You can't stick it. All right, let's skip ahead to Dussac. For all you people who say that Meyer is a Liechtenauer, okay? What do you do with the Dussac? How do you do a punch cut? There's a one-handed thing in there. Okay, great. So the plunge cut there, if Jeff will be my partner for a second. So here, I've either cut, I've either succeeded and grazed him and hit him, and then I come around quickly for a false edge. Okay? In Dussac, the plunge is a hole, and then in his face. This is the guy who says you don't thrust. Okie doke. Meyer has what I like to think of as explicit and implicit pedagogy. Okay? Meyer doesn't just come out and say, oh, see what I did with that punch cut? Yeah, you can do that with longsword. Stick it in his face. I think it's implicit. Meyer has tons of as explicit as he is also very implicit. You guys know, what's a unicorn? I know you can demonstrate it, but what is it? Think about it. And I know you've thought about it. Pardon me. I'm reminding you. What
A
is
horse
unicorn?
with a spike or something, right?
What's the
The
unicorn?
endpoint
It's a
of a
beautiful
rising
mythical
cut.
creature that we should always question. Yes, sir.
Endpoint of a rising cut.
I think so. Okay. Does he say that? No. And people think that Meyer is needlessly complicating the perfect pure four words. No, he's showing you how to end an interest. Yes.
Yeah, I also think that there's a great parallel in one of those cases, Aufschlager,
Mhm.
when he says, I fought in the proper way, except for the one time when I stabbed him.
Yeah.
But that, like, I basically, one jab, and the rest of the time I hit him with a flat.
Come on, it's like going 5 miles over on the highway. You gotta get it to me. It's one jab.
And then there's something in Tussie that's important. She distinguishes sharply between the law as written and the law as practiced. And we have a record of both.
Yes.
The law as written banned any kind of fighting.
Yeah, but it was so like you brought up the Portugal there. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, if you can just be like the social ties of having, as John has talked about the free cities in 2 excellent lectures now. The social ties of having a Martian culture within the free city is a way of keeping that free city an autonomous entity. Okay. The ramifications, like I said, John was like, you don't need no police. You got boom, you got butchers. They're up there, they're helping the guy. Okay. Same thing. I mean, they revere this Martian culture. Why would they want to punish it? The Portugal was defending himself. Pop, 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 7 blows. They're like, that was pretty good. Yeah, that was pretty good.
And it must not like the guy that got cut.
That's the thing. It's all social. It's like, yeah, he was kind of a jerk anyway. Can you show us how you did that? So society will trump law, and I find that absolutely fascinating. And it reinforces social context is necessary when you examine fencing. And it's not just about, yeah, you gotta kill him, okay? So, now, any questions on that? All right, to support this theory, a buddy of mine a couple years ago, being an engineer, was bored one day and decided to go through all of Meyer's devices in the longsword, Dussac, and rapier sections and pull together statistical data on things like target, what edge of the blade was used, and whether it was a cut or thrust, that kind of thing. And I think the results should not surprise you. All right, next slide, please. So here we have whether you were using thrust, cuts, or other. Other, by the way, is where simply when you got other or NE, not explicit, you'll see in later slides, that just means Meyer wasn't explicit. And my buddy is very, very scrupulous, and I respect it, so he wasn't about to say, frequently Meyer will say, do this, and then hit him. Well, he didn't tell you. But what you can see is that longsword, you thrust 2% of the time. That's what three thrusts in his book come out to. Actually 2.2, but split hairs. Cuts, is anyone shocked that we have 87%? All right. And other, because he's not explicit, or maybe you're talking about slices, et cetera, you've got 11%. The Dussac, I was actually kind of shocked that there weren't more thrusts, because I guess when I read it, I was really focusing. I guess I was shocked that there was thrusting in the face at all. We've got 10% thrusts, about the same amount of cuts, and only 5% other. Okay? There's much less slicing, all right, because it's one-handed weapon probably. Okay? And then the rapier, shock. 49% thrusts, 44% cuts, and only 7% other. Okay? And just because he was feeling retro in like 5th grade PowerPoint presentation, he gave me graphs, so that's pretty cool. All right, so next slide, please. All right, now what are the targets? All right, for longsword, 51%. Body, only 6. Effectual anyone? Highest bleeding head wound? I don't know. Arm, 11. That's a lot of slices. 32% is not explicit. He's not telling you what the target is. Okay. Dussac, head 47. Body, 3%, which makes a lot of sense. Driving a one-handed weapon towards the body is a difficult target. 13% arm. That raises slightly. And then not explicit. And finally, rapier, 36, 28. And he goes for legs, sometimes 6. All right, so targets can vary. But the most telling one there for me is the longsword, the propensity of the longsword to go for the head. Okay? Probably a good rapier, you can split out head, body, that kind of thing. And if we assume maybe a lot of the non-explicit was head or body, you're accounting for a great percentage, because that's a thrusting number. Okay, that's going to be some damage. Next slide, please. All right, now, true edge, false edge, flat, point, pommel, aft, really not explicit. This is where the data gets fuzzy, because sometimes when he says smack them, he's not telling you how to smack them. But obviously we've got true edge, 11.2% with the longsword, false edge, 21.2. That could be an artifact of Meyer specifically trying to tell you that now use the false edge, when he's assuming most of the time you're using the long edge. I honestly am not prepared to make a firm statement. The flat, 5.7, so that's the slappy blow that everybody mocks. Okay. Point, 2.2%, as I said, tells us not to do it, and it does it. And then column half, 2.8%, and the not explicit, again, you've all read Meyer, do this, flip around, blah, blah, blah. All right. DUSAC, 6.9, let's see. What am I trying to say? Yeah, again, let's skip to the, because I know we're running short on time. Let's skip to the not so shocking thing. Rapier, point, 48.7. Okay? So he's escalating as each of the weapons go up, okay? If we can assume, I'm making an assumption here, the point driven to the body, as John was saying, cuts you can heal, points are more difficult, okay? He's telling you he's going up and up, it's ramping up his lethality, all right? And next slide. I will simply leave you with the thought that Meyer's Kung Fu is stronger than your questions? Jeff?
So can you remind me what the order of all the different weapon forms in Meyer is? I mean, I think you mentioned the first three, right?
I mentioned the first three because I'll be honest, those are the ones I'm most interested in, okay? And Mike can back me up on the other ones, but give me a shot first. You've obviously got longsword, DUSAC, rapier,
Right.
and then I believe, does he go to pole weapons next? Dagger? Dagger. Pole weapons? There you go.
And pull up into go short staff, halberd, long staff.
Show up.
Yeah.
That's fine, but I mean, again, the daggers, I can see us supporting that even further.
Sure.
Yeah, I think Pierre Henry Bonte's article indicated that the dagger was extremely lethal in the hierarchy of weapons. And
Sure.
The dagger and the halberd was definitely very large.
And actually, and you put halberd as top, right?
Right.
Huh.
Yeah.
I'm not ignoring those weapons.
No, but we're agreeing with you. I think it's like halberd seems to be the most lethal, and then like dagger, the spear, and then dagger, and then
Sure.
swords.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was, of course, focusing on the sword system.
Right. But it seems like that model might be possible.
Might be able to be expanded.
And the sidearms that they're carrying in the city quite often are these rapier, the side sword, rapier.
So-called side swords. Well, Mark's not here, so you can call him side swords.
Right.
If Mark Millman were here, he'd go ballistic. They're not side swords.
Yeah, that's.
Oh.
All right, so let's make sure we get questions. Anything else
So there was actually a last piece of the presentation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But in the interest of time, I'm going to skip it. I'll go give you the 30-second version. There's 5 weapons. They all represent real-world things. You have great swords, which were the other two-handed sword besides the common sidearm. And if you look at Meyer's longsword system, it seems like a hybridized longsword, greatsword system. Possibly because he wanted to relate it to the true combat weapon and the sidearm. You've got the DUSAC, which, contrary to popular belief about either of those things, it's actually just a German saber. And there are tons and tons of surviving German sabers from Meyer's period. It's the wooden one that we see is just the training version. Sometimes it caught on fire. This is from a fireworks book from the 1590s that Keith Farrell found, which actually refers to the DUSAC as a training saber. So that more or less settles that question, but just for the record, there were small ones. Meyer has big ones. They might have been small wooden ones with a leather cover over them, which you can see in some of the plates. It looks like there's multiple parts. Wooden training sabers have been used for, this is an 18th century wooden training saber from America, which looks like a DUSAC because that's what a training saber is like. Rapier is a rapier. There are thick ones with thick blades like Meyer likes. Later on, they got thinner. If you look at Jacob Suter, Meyer's acolyte, he has very narrow rapiers. And daggers are daggers. Spears are scary. And that's the end of it. He was Meyer influenced about the next 100 years of German school training, and then it died off because warfare changed.
What's that middle of the image?
That is Theodore Verolini from 1673, who basically ripped off Meyer in a brand new edition, only he didn't quite understand some of the plays very well. And the explanation that he wrote shows. Yes, Jeff. So that's it. Questions?
Yeah, I just want to throw out a opinion there and maybe wrong, but I don't know that the greatsword is the only battlefield weapon, because the sidearm is super important.
Okay. I was talking quickly.
Right.
The greatsword was a different battlefield
That's
weapon.
a quibble, right.
And we know that the Doppelsnolder, well, we know because I've never actually been given a reference for this, but everyone knows that the Doppelsnolder, the greatsword specialists in the German armies in the Landsknechte, had to be masters of the longsword certified by the Marchbruder. So what does that tell you about the connectedness of German greatsword teachings and German longsword teachings? I think it was all sort of, they tried to, I mean, the things applied, obviously you modified. Meyer's longsword has lots more big sweeping motions, lots more inertia-based motions than Liechtenauer's longsword does. Oh, maybe it's because it's a 6-foot sword they have to use sometimes. And they want to be able to apply what they know to it.
Yeah, I mean, even if you go back to that bad work slide that he had coming back, a lot of those guys have swords as sidearms.
I love that picture.
Like, see the guys that got, look up their hip, the guy in the foreground on the right?
Yeah, he's got a
He's got a halberd, he's dragging around a longsword on the battlefield.
The guys with halberds. Well, Meyer's 20-foot staff is most likely a pike simulator. And you see lots of pikes in there.
That sword showing up in the lower right-hand corner, that looks suspiciously like the one we looked at today. The actual.
I probably asked the same one.
It's the same sword, actually. So.
But I just said, like, you know, the sword was almost
And but
always.
I mean, at the same time, right next to that guy, you see a guy with a suspiciously huge longsword, which very well could be a Zweihander.
Yes.
So I mean, it was all in the same theater.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. Oh, okay. You know, these, like the Swiss were carrying long swords as sidearms for a long time. Swords of any kind. Whether it's
And so I think that some of the modifications Meyer made to his longsword system were to support the greatsword troops.
Yeah, and I also think swords in general, like the hand and a half were getting bigger.
And likewise, the other point I forgot to make is that we all like to hate on historically accurate floppy feathers. Gregor Zabinski in his book, which people have heard me grab about sometimes, but actually it's a really good book, and he has lots of great measurements of actual greatswords that he located in museums. And guess what? A lot of them were not stiff all the way through, like we like to imagine, but actually did have a lot of flexibility in the tips. So a training sword that is equally flexible will teach you to not rely on binding in places where your greatsword won't bind. And that's another possible reason why a lot of the training swords that we have that are Meyer-esque don't handle the way we like to think a longsword should handle. Because they have to pull double duty with these greatswords.
Also, I mean, you know, of course, conjecturally, also it's what the Feldhau is about. It could be a real Ernst technique potentially. It's like, because he even says in, you know, the first play of Wontag, you react against his Oberhau with his Zornhau with the flat, try to hit him on the head with your flat, and if it hits or not, then you go to the next. Right? So I mean, with one of these big great swords, that would suck to just get that whammed onto your head. Now you're like kind of like, oh, and then you're getting your arm, then you're getting your wrist cut off at the next cut. You know.
So anyways, I'll finish my piece with my opinion of Meyer has actually changed over the past year or two as I've looked at some of this stuff and talked to a lot of diehard Meyer guys. Well, I still love Fiore di Liberio and I still love Liechtenauer. I think of Meyer is not this late period abomination who corrupted Liechtenauer, but instead as a guy who really tried to make Liechtenauer applicable to late 16th century German combat. And you see that in the greatsword and longsword foils that he was using. You see that also again in the fact that he took Lecoughner's Messer and applied it to Italian rapier. And was really trying to take those old texts, which he obviously liked enough to laboriously hand copy, which I certainly haven't done, and actually tried to integrate them into the teachings that he was doing in his fencing school. So I think it's an important look at both 16th century combat and at variations on the core Liechtenauer tradition that dominates a lot of longsword play today.
On his last book, is that starting to become available? And do you know if anybody's starting to translate it?
I have it. Kevin Maurer has transcribed it and he's working on a translation of it. I don't know if Jeffrey Forgang is planning to do anything with it in the book that he's putting out soon. But I mean, it's available. It's last remnants of the HEMA manuscript black market, right? I mean, you can get it. I've talked to the Rostock, or I've tried to, and they haven't really been very helpful. Hopefully, that changes in the future. That's all I can say.
No, is that
I would like to put it on the Liechtenauer, but
yeah.
not yet.
You say that includes copies of some of these other manuals?
It does. He has he hits the high notes of every major 15th century treatise except odds for some reason. He doesn't cover wrestling at all. But everything else pretty much is in there. Including a really bizarre 20-page treatise on a bunch of weapons, including dagger and poleaxe, where the only other place you'll find it is Paulus Hector Meyer's manuscripts. No idea where it comes from or who wrote it, but it's in Meyer and it's in Meyer. And that's it. And there are different orders between the two of them. They rejumbled them for some reason.
So we only have a couple minutes left, and actually, is there anybody here who's not going to dinner? Raise your hand. Okay. So if you have any final questions, I'd like you to get a chance to ask them. We also had some questions when we were collecting questions online for the event. I'm going to just read some of these now.